Nothing should live here. Cross the Mojave floor in July, and by noon the ground reads 120 degrees. Drop a water bottle, and it's warm in 10 minutes, hot in 20. Head out past the valley, and you can walk for miles seeing nothing but creosote bush, cracked hardpan, and heat bending the air until the mountains seem to melt. 4 inches of rain a year. 4, some years less. The soil is so dry, so salted, that early Spanish explorers who crossed it wrote journal entries reading like obituaries for men who were still alive. And then you crest a rise on Interstate 15, usually after dark, and the desert just stops. Where there should be nothing, there's a wall of light so blinding that pilots use it to navigate from 60 miles out. Pyramids, a replica of the Eiffel Tower. A volcano that erupts on a timer. Fountains dancing to Sinatra in a place that can't spare a single drop. 2.3 million people live in this valley now. Roughly 40 million more pour through every year to hand over their money on purpose. Here's what nobody asks on the drive in. Why is any of this here? Because on paper, Las Vegas is a mistake. Every rule that decides where great cities rise, this place breaks. Rivers, there's no navigable river anywhere near it. Ports, it's landlocked, 800 feet up, hundreds of miles from any coast. Farmland, the valley couldn't feed a village. Climate, one of the most hostile inhabited spots in the continental United States. A bowl of rock that traps heat like an oven and holds it deep into the night. Natural resources to build an economy on? No coal seam. No oil field. No great forest. No fertile delta. By the logic that raised Chicago on its lake, New Orleans on its river, San Francisco on its bay, Las Vegas should be a ghost town, a gas station, and a graveyard. So how did a patch of poisoned dirt become the entertainment capital of the planet? Hold on to that question, because the answer is stranger than the drought stories you already know. Everyone talks about the water, Lake Mead dropping, Lake Powell circling dead pool, the Colorado River overdrawn by cities that were promised more than the river ever carried. All true, all coming. But water scarcity alone should have strangled this place in the cradle, and it didn't. Vegas kept growing straight through drought years that gutted reservoirs upstream. The valley added residents while the west ran dry. Something is keeping this city alive that has nothing to do with rainfall. By the end, I'll show you exactly what it is. Sit with the numbers for a second, because they don't add up. The Las Vegas Metro pulls in over $80 billion a year in visitor spending. The Strip alone, that 4-mile stretch of resorts that isn't even technically inside the city limits, generates gaming revenue that dwarfs entire national economies. A single casino floor can move more cash in a weekend than a mid-sized American town sees in a year. And it does this sitting on land that grows nothing, exports nothing, produces no physical thing you can hold in your hand. Vegas doesn't mine anything. It doesn't manufacture anything you'd load onto a truck. It sells something invisible. And it sells more of it than almost anywhere on Earth. Think about what that means. Detroit had cars. Pittsburgh had steel. Houston had oil. Every great American boomtown was built on a thing, a resource you could dig up, refine, ship, and sell. Las Vegas built a metropolis of 2 million people on a feeling. On the willingness of a stranger from Ohio to walk into a room, put a chip on green, and lose. That's the product. That's the entire foundation these towers stand on. And it should be the shakiest ground imaginable, because feelings are fickle and people generally hate losing money. Except they don't leave. They come back, year after year. In recessions, in pandemics, in triple-digit heat that would send a rational person sprinting for the coast. They fly in from Tokyo and Manchester and Sydney to lose money in a desert. Why? That's the second question, and it's the one that actually matters. Because the water problem is an engineering problem, you can pipe it, recycle it, ration it, buy your way around it for a long time. The real mystery is human. How did anyone convince the entire world that the best place to spend your vacation, your paycheck, sometimes your marriage, is a furnace in the middle of nowhere where the games are rigged against you and everybody knows it? Because they do know it. That's what gets me. Nobody who sits down at a roulette table is confused about the odds. The house edge isn't a secret. It's printed, published, studied, taught in statistics classes. Play long enough and you will lose. That's not bad luck. It's arithmetic. Baked right into the felt. And people keep sitting down anyway. Willingly, cheerfully, they tip the dealer who's taking their money. Something about this place short-circuits the part of the brain that's supposed to protect us, and it does it so smoothly that most people thank Vegas on the way out the door. I used to think Las Vegas was a story about greed. It isn't. It's a story about design. Somebody, over the span of a century, figured out how to take the most hostile square mile in America and turn it into a machine that manufactures desire on command, then engineered every carpet fiber, every light temperature, every missing clock and window to keep that machine humming. The desert didn't kill this city. The desert became the point. To understand how that happened, you've got to go back to when there was nothing here at all. No lights, no towers, no river of tourists, just a rail line, a water spring, and a handful of men who looked at the least survivable ground in the West and saw something everyone else had missed. What they built out of that dust wasn't a city yet. It was a bet. And to see how that bet paid off beyond anyone's wildest math, we start with a single stop on a railroad and the thirst that made it valuable. May 15th, 1905, a dusty auction lot right beside the tracks of the San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad. The railroad picked this scrap of Mojave for one reason, and one reason only. It sat near artesian springs. Springs that could water steam locomotives on the long haul between Salt Lake and Southern California. That's it. That's the whole origin story. A place to fill a boiler. Bidders showed up under a tent in blistering heat, and over 2 days they bought roughly 1,200 lots for around $265,000. Somebody scratched a name onto a map. Las Vegas. The meadows, Spanish for the green patches the spring water kept alive. Nobody at that auction was dreaming of casinos. They were dreaming of a railroad town, warehouses, a rail yard, maybe a hotel for the passengers passing through. And for the first 3 decades, that's exactly what Vegas was, a sun-scorched service stop with a population you could count in the low thousands. Sweating out summers that regularly cleared 110 degrees with no air conditioning to speak of. Then, 2 things happened almost at once. And they rewrote everything. In 1931, the state of Nevada, broke and desperate in the Great Depression, did something no other state would touch. It re-legalized wide-open casino gambling. Not tucked away in some back room. Legal, licensed, out in the daylight. That same year, construction crews swarmed Black Canyon, 30 miles southeast, to build the Hoover Dam, Boulder Dam, they called it then, a federal project that dumped thousands of paid workers into the region with cash in their pockets and nothing to spend it on out in the rock and sand. You see where this is going. Thirsty men. Legal vice. A brand new spring of federal wages. The math wasn't subtle. Downtown Fremont Street lit its first neon, the sawdust joints filled with dam workers, and the town that existed to water trains started watering something far more profitable. The human appetite for risk. But the small-time downtown grind isn't what made Vegas famous. That took a different kind of man entirely. Enter the mob. And here's where I have to correct a myth, because the popular story hands one gangster all the credit, and that's not quite honest. The Flamingo, the plush, tropical, carpet, and chandelier resort that aimed the whole city toward glamour, usually gets pinned entirely on Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Siegel was the frontman. The charisma. The guy with the movie star looks and the murderous temper. But the money behind him ran through Meyer Lansky and the National Crime Syndicate, and the concept itself borrowed from a Hollywood businessman named Billy Wilkerson, who'd started building on that spot before Siegel muscled in. The Flamingo opened the day after Christmas 1946. It was a disaster. Rain, unfinished rooms, celebrities who never showed, a casino that actually lost money in its first weeks. The budget had ballooned from an estimated $1 million to roughly $6 million, and a lot of that overrun vanished into pockets that weren't supposed to have it. In June 1947, Bugsy Siegel was sitting on a couch in a Beverly Hills living room when someone fired a rifle through the window and killed him. 9 bullets. His investors had decided the skim was more than they'd stomach. Here's the payoff to a question I left hanging. How does a city with no natural reason to exist end up printing money? The mob answered it. And their answer is the engine that still runs the place today. They figured out, decades before any psychology department put numbers to it, that the product was never the dice. The product was the feeling. The mob-run casinos of the 1950s wrote the whole grammar of the modern strip, the comp-ed rooms, the free drinks, the buffet spread so cheap it made no sense until you realized it was bait. The showgirls and the crooners flown in to make a gambler feel like a high roller even while he was losing his shirt. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr. The Rat Pack turned the Sands into the coolest room on earth, and every ticket sold was really an invitation to stroll past a wall of slot machines on the way in and on the way out. They weren't selling gambling. They were selling permission. Permission to be somebody else for a weekend. Permission to burn money you'd never touch back home. What happens in Vegas? That idea lived in the Architecture 40 years before it became a slogan. Now here's the part most people never think about. The mob understood something ruthless about human hope, and they built rooms around it. The near miss. Watch a slot player when two cherries land on the pay line and the third stops just one notch short. That almost doesn't register as a loss to the brain. It reads as a near win. It fires the same reward circuitry as an actual jackpot, and it makes you play again, faster, harder. Modern researchers have hooked people up to brain scanners and confirmed it. But the men running these floors in 1955 knew it in their gut. They tuned the machines, the payout rhythms, the just close enough losses to keep the hope alive right up to the moment the wallet ran dry. Every free drink, every clock stripped off the wall, every window bricked over so you'd lose track of whether it was noon or midnight. All of it served one goal. Keep you inside. Keep you playing. Keep hope on a slow drip. The house doesn't need to cheat. The math already guarantees the win. A roulette wheel pays 35 to 1 on a number that has a 1 in 38 chance of landing. That gap, that sliver between the true odds and the payout, is the house edge. And across millions of spins, it's as reliable as gravity. The genius wasn't rigging the game. It was making you volunteer for a game you were mathematically destined to lose, and making you feel lucky while you did it. By the late 1960s, though, the mob had a problem. Heat, federal investigators, the FBI, the skim exposed, licenses hanging by a thread. The gangsters who built the fantasy couldn't hold on to it anymore. And into that gap stepped one of the strangest figures in American business history. Howard Hughes, billionaire, aviation tycoon. Recluse, in November 1966, he checked into the top floor of the Desert Inn and simply never left. When management asked him to clear out of the penthouse for the holiday high rollers, Hughes did the one thing only Howard Hughes would do. He bought the entire hotel so nobody could evict him. Then he just kept buying. The Sands, the Frontier, the Castaways. Around $300 million poured into Vegas real estate from a man who reportedly sat in a darkened room, terrified of germs, watching the same movies on a loop. Looked like insanity. It was actually the hinge of the whole story. Hughes was a legitimate, publicly known corporate name, and his buying spree gave Wall Street permission to see Vegas as an investment instead of a crime scene. Nevada passed the Corporate Gaming Act in 1969, letting publicly traded companies own casinos without every single shareholder getting individually licensed. That one legal change is what turned Vegas from a mob town into a corporate juggernaut. And the corporations took the mob psychology playbook and industrialized it. Kirk Kerkorian built the International, then the original MGM Grand, betting that bigger was always better. Then came the man who rewrote the rules yet again, Steve Wynn, who opened the Mirage in 1989 with an exploding volcano out front, a white tiger habitat, and a dolphin pool. Wynn's insight was brutal and simple. The casino floor was becoming a smaller and smaller slice of the profit, so he sold everything else. Fine dining, shopping, spectacle you'd pay for whether you ever gambled or not. The desire machine the mob had wired by instinct, the corporations refined into a science, with quarterly earnings reports. And it kept working. Better, colder, more efficient with every reinvention. Which raises the real question hiding underneath all of it. If the odds always favor the house, and everyone kind of knows that walking in the door, why do the tourists keep coming back? Why does the impossible city keep winning bets it has no business winning? Walk out past the last slot machine, past the valet stand, past the taxi line at 2 a.m, and stand where the pavement ends. The desert is right there. It always was. A quarter-mile off the strip, the streetlights thin out, and the Mojave takes over. Creosote, hardpan, silence so complete it hums. That emptiness never left. It's been pressing against the neon the entire time, patient, indifferent, waiting for the day the pumps stop and the pipes run dry. And yet the lights stay on. Here's the truth the whole city is built on, the one nobody prints on a brochure. Vegas doesn't win in spite of being impossible. It wins because it is impossible. The impossibility is the product. The impossibility is what you're paying for. Think about what you're actually buying when you fly in. Not a hotel room, you can get a hotel room anywhere. Not a buffet, not a card table, not a show. You're buying a night inside a fantasy that human limits don't apply. That the desert can be beaten. That the odds can be beaten. That the version of you who walks off that plane, broke or bored or 46 years old and tired, could walk back on a winner. Vegas sells the feeling of standing at the edge of the impossible and betting on it anyway. That's the merchandise. Everything else, the volcano, the dancing fountains at the Bellagio, the Eiffel Tower half-scale on the median, it's all just packaging for that one sensation. That's why the tourists come back. Not because they forget the math. They know the math. 40 million of them a year know the house edge on roulette is 5.26%, and they put the chips down anyway. Because for the length of one spin, they get to live inside a story where the number is theirs, where the impossible bends. And Vegas figured out something no other city on earth monetized so completely. People will pay almost anything, again and again, for the temporary belief that they can beat the unbeatable. The city is a mirror. Look at the fountains at the Bellagio, 8.5 acres of water, shooting 240 feet into air that hits 115 degrees by June. It's an obscene act. Fountains, in a place where Lake Mead, the reservoir that feeds this whole region, has fallen to some of the lowest levels since it was first filled in the 1930s. It should be a scandal. Instead, it's the most photographed thing in the city. Because the fountains aren't wasting water. They're making a promise. They're saying, look what we did to the desert. Look what we took. And every person standing at that railing in the heat, phone up, filming, is buying a share of that defiance. The scale of the trick is almost hard to hold in your head. 2.3 million people living where the land offers no river, no port, no harbor, no reason. A place that gets around 4 inches of rain in a year. A city that pipes nearly all its water from a lake 90% of the West is fighting over, that recycles almost every drop that goes down a drain, that has become a global model for water reuse precisely because it never had any water to begin with. Necessity didn't just build Vegas. Necessity is the whole architecture of it. Strip away the desperation of the setting, and there's no miracle left to sell. And that's the part the mob understood by instinct, and the corporations turned into a spreadsheet. The near miss. The cherry blank, the story you carry home, isn't the $1,100 you lost. It's the one hand where you were one card away. That near miss is the impossible flickering into reach, and then closing again. And your brain files it not as a loss, but as almost. Almost is the most valuable word in the entire economy of that town. Almost is what buys the plane ticket back. You want to know why it keeps winning, bets it has no business winning? Because it never actually bets. The house isn't gambling. You are. The house sold you the desert, the defiance, the near miss, the fantasy that the rules are suspended for the length of your stay, and it charged you for the fantasy whether or not you ever won a hand. The genius wasn't the gambling. The genius was building a machine that turns hope into revenue with the reliability of a utility. Steve Wynn saw it. The casino floor shrinks, the fantasy expands, and the money follows the fantasy. So the city that should not exist becomes the most honest place in America about what people are. Everywhere else pretends the odds don't matter. Vegas puts the odds on the table, in neon, in felt, in the mahogany of a craps rail, and dares you to bet against them anyway. And you do. You always do. Because underneath the buffets and the light shows and the 2-drink minimum lounges, the thing being sold is the oldest human hunger there is. The belief that just this once, the impossible will break your way. Stand at the edge of the pavement again. Look back at it now. That skyline isn't a monument to luxury, or vice, or even money. Not really. It's a monument to a bet, the one every person who ever came here placed the second they arrived. The bet that the desert can be beaten, that the house can be beaten, that the story ends differently this time. Most nights, the desert wins, the house wins. The odds hold, the way odds always hold. But the lights stay on. The fountains keep firing water into 115-degree air. The planes keep landing full. And somewhere on a floor, with no clocks and no windows, someone is one card away, feeling the impossible tilt toward them, paying, gladly, for the privilege of believing it will.